Welcome to The Art of Humanity with Jessica Ann. Listen for fresh perspectives with artists, leaders, authors, and entrepreneurs. Explore creativity and consciousness. Evolve your business with The Art of Humanity. Now, here's your host, Jessica Ann.
Welcome to another episode of The Art of Humanity, where we explore creativity and consciousness to allow you and your business to evolve. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Asa Idoni, who is a composer and sound healer, a certified hypnotherapist, and practitioner of neurolinguistic programming. Asa, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm glad to be here.
Asa, you're a sound healer. Can you explain to our listeners what exactly that means?
Sure. It means different things to different people, and it's definitely meant a lot of different things to me over my process of development and exploration with it. But essentially, sound healing is a way to be with music of any kind, really, and to be with sound in such a way that can put us into contact with our inner world in a therapeutic way. So one of the ways I like to use sound healing is through brainwave entrainment technology, which is essentially a way of offering a particular kind of stimulus to the brain that allows us to enter into certain states of consciousness where healing and evolution and change can occur more easily. So a lot of people think of Tibetan singing bowls and gong meditations and these sorts of things, and that's all definitely a part of it. But I've focused more on the scientific aspect of the neuroacoustics, so the way that sound and music and frequencies impact the brain and brainwave states, and also the mysticism of sound. So I like to explore music theory and its intersection points with the mystery teachings. So it's really been a process of exploring how to use sound to kind of drop into these states of meditation and consciousness where we can come in contact with our own inner silence, with that space in us that is deeply connected to truth.
I love that. How did you get into being this sound healer and what you do now?
Well, I was always into music, as most kids are growing up.
What kind of music?
Well, I played drums.
Cool.
And so I was a percussionist, and I played on a drum set with my brother who played guitar, and we jammed a lot. I was also in the marching band and orchestra in junior high school and high school growing up. Mm-hmm. And I just always really loved music. I was interested in traditional tribal rhythms and, hand drums and that sort of thing. And later I picked up the flute, and I played flute in ensemble for a semester, and just really found music to be one of the most nourishing and exciting things that I could invest my time in. And so as I, grew up and got interested in other things, I found different alternative healing modalities very interesting to me, especially hypnotherapy. And so when I opened up a hypnotherapy practice, about 10 years ago now, 11 years ago, I started to notice that these states of consciousness that people are entering into when they go into trance, when they go into that hypnotic state of opening into a deeper receptivity to suggestion for the unconscious mind, I noticed that music was able to facilitate similar states. So I started to incorporate music into my therapeutic practice, and I noticed that I got really good results, and I could even speak a lot less. and have my clients go very deep, very, very quickly. So at some point I realized that it was possible to fuse my two passions.
So cool.
And that's what got me on this path.
When I tried to set up a time to speak with you, you said that you don't make any set plans. You live in the moment. How do you make this work?
Well, it's not that I don't make plans. I just try not to.
Why is that? Why?
I definitely, I'm willing to, and I just really enjoy having the freedom to kind of be in the flow of my creative process. And I'm always willing to make plans if that's what's called for. I just have a preference to kind of, be spontaneous and in the moment. Oftentimes I find myself making plans to do something, and that's maybe not what's the most inspiring thing for me to do at that moment.
You have resistance to making set plans?
Maybe it's not resistance. It's that I want to make plans when plans are necessary, and I also want to leave space and have the freedom to let the muse work on me and work through me to be with. I just kind of work with my strengths on that, and I know that I thrive most when I have an open schedule. And then I've also kind of made plans in my life and have just been on fire with a creative project and have had to kind of shut down that, flow in order to go and do something in the world in a more linear way. And so there's a tug of war there.
Something that you mentioned a little bit earlier was integral theory. And I think you mentioned that one of your mentors is Ken Wilber, who is known as the Einstein of consciousness. And he's the originator of arguably the first truly comprehensive integrative philosophy, aptly named integral theory. He believes that every field of knowledge contains at least one aspect of truth, no matter how small. Can you shed some more light on integral theory and why you think it's important?
Wow, you've been doing your homework. I'm really interested in the process of evolution and how healing and growth and change occur. And, I'm also really interested in the ways in which people can come together in an experience of mutual understanding and shared experience. And so I've been deeply curious about what people are saying, in terms of what is the big picture? What is the purpose of life? What are the orienting generalities, as Ken Wilber describes them, that allow us to come together in a comprehensive way, in a loving way, in a unifying way. And in all of my search through different pathways of spiritual teachings and various healing modalities, everybody has a different opinion about the nature of reality and the purpose of the human experience, and what kinds of teachings are worth pursuing and which ones are not. And it's almost never the case that people really agree. And so I've been really curious as how do we find those places where we can all see the same thing in similar ways? How can we take the best of the ideas that are out there and organize them so that we can all play together nicely? And so I found integral philosophy and integral theory to be one of the most concise and comprehensive ways of knitting together all of the various fields of study, from the sciences to the different spiritual teachings. And they describe integral theory as being psychoactive, in the sense that just to subject your mind to the ideas that are there has a deeply impactful effect in the way that we process information, in the way that we experience our reality.
So you're saying that just knowing about integral theory and identifying with the basics of it, you can expand your mind?
Yes, it can catalyze the evolutionary process tremendously just by, working with the concepts. So a lot of the concepts have influenced the way that I relate to, science and sound healing and, and even spiritual teachings. And so when I come across these golden nuggets of wisdom, which are just all over the place in integral theory, I try and reference these ideas to the way that I implement the insights that I've come to and the different methods and techniques that I've used in my creating these sound healing programs. So one of the ways I can give you a kind of concrete example here in how integral theory has impacted my sound healing work. They point out, and I say they because there's a lot of writers on this, and of course Ken Wilber is kind of the most well-known and the most prolific of the writers in integral theory. But there are many amazing, inspiring writers, and I enjoy a lot of them. But they point out that there are these four basic states of consciousness. Well, three, but and three bodies.
Okay.
But then the fourth is kind of all-encompassing. So they talk about the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body. Now the gross body is the physical. So that's where we experience this third-dimensional reality, this the time-space situation of our five senses. The subtle body then is kind of more the intuitive, interior kind of internal sensations that happen. And these can be, these inner luminosities, these inner intuitions that are really hard to describe in a concrete way. And it's a very subjective part of our nature and our inner life.
Going back to that second one, would you explain that by associating it with synchronicities? Or does that simplify it too much?
I know there's a connection and there's some overlap there. And I think, the subtle body, the subtle field definitely does have a relationship to the way in which we experience those synchronicities, and has a lot to do with whether or not we're alert to them.
Okay. I don't mean to take you too off track. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I would probably have to sit with that a little bit to come up with a really clear answer for you.
Okay, no worries.
And then the third body that's pointed out in integral theory is the causal body. And so when we get into things like archetypes and the symbols of the human experience and the deep interior aspect of ourselves in terms of the deep unconscious mind, and even those intersecting points with the collective unconscious mind, there's a rich tapestry of information and stories that happen there. And then the fourth is the non-dual. So, but I can probably just leave that out for this conversation, since it tends to kind of be a challenge to address in with language.
Okay.
So I started to notice that, in a way I can kind of make these connections, these correspondences between these brainwave states that I'd been working with within myself and these aspects of consciousness. So I noticed that, the gross body can be in a way linked to the beta brainwave frequencies. So when we're working out or doing physical activity, when we're, activated in that fight or flight mechanism, we're very much tuned in to our sensory perceptions. The kind of the reptilian brain comes online, and it's kind of trying to use all the senses to measure where danger is and how to respond and things of this nature. And then as we kind of tune in and kind of slow down and become more relaxed and more settled, and those alpha brainwave patterns start to come online, we become more receptive to the subtle body. And so we can kind of feel the interiors of our body in a way that goes beyond just sight, smell, taste, touch, and physical outer sensation. And be awake to that feeling of aliveness inside of the body, to be awake to the inner light, so to speak. And seeing these connections to me is like really fascinating, because I love to make these connections between correspondences, because I see this world as this kind of self-replicating fractal, in a sense, that even our physical body and our consciousness in its own way is this mirror to the microcosm. And just making these connections and seeing how there are these universal patterns of creation that start to emerge again and again and again. These symbol associations start to become intertwined and interconnected, and so much more meaning and richness can become available to us through these interpretations. And that's where the causal body can come online, is when we're deeply connected to the causal field. The symbols of this, and this is kind of difficult to talk about, and so I'm cautious in the way that I say this, but the symbols, which themselves are these kind of living entities, these kind of storehouses of wisdom and information, have an ability to point out these interior structures of creation and the interiors of our own psyche. So in going into these theta states, which I've done for many, many years, and kind of exploring how the unconscious mind, speaks in this language of symbols, it becomes really interesting and more possible to make observations about reality and about our inner nature using these abstract concepts or archetypes, as I like to call them, as Carl Jung, one of my favorite transpersonal psychologists,
Love Carl Jung. Yeah.
has described.
Yeah.
And so, this is really fascinating to me, because I think a part of the problem with information and with certain teachings and certain doctrines, and where there's debates between this teaching is better than that teaching and this makes more sense than that, is that we're actually kind of just approaching these concepts and these insights and ideas from this really rational place. And the intellect is absolutely essential for functioning in our day-to-day life and for accomplishing certain goals. But as we're trying to unravel these deeper questions, is what is the meaning of life? What is the nature of creation? What is the function of this physical experience of I amness? And how do I navigate these very abstract and difficult territories of my subjective experience? And how do I reconcile the seemingly conflicted and contradictory ideas that I keep hearing from all these different teachers and teachings? And I think the way that we do that is through entering into those deeper states of the causal aspect of our consciousness, to kind of peel back the layers of meaning to get at the underlying essence and the underlying structures of that. And the more and more that we do that, I have the sense that, we become activated and awake to the deeper truth within all of these external forms of the expression of truth. And then we can start to see these patterns of this coherent tapestry of interconnectivity between all forms of information and insight.
One of the things you mentioned was the contradictory ideas and the different theories of everyone, and how that kind of impacts our deeper truth. How does your music really allow listeners to come into consciousness with their deeper truth, even though, in the rational mind, there might be a paradox going on? How do listeners kind of tap into that when they hear your music?
Yeah. Well, on a rational level, on a scientific level, one of the things that's happening when we start listening to neuroacoustics is that these aspects of our neurology start to get activated that were before dormant. So, in a sense, we can call it like a neuroaerobic exercise. So we're listening to frequencies that our brain isn't used to processing, and that requires the development of new networks of our neurology to become activated. And when this happens, it's, we're also engaging that subtle energy body. And, these frequencies, these vibrations can actually kind of impact our subtle anatomy in such a way that, blockages in our unconscious mind start to get shaken loose. If there's, traumas or unresolved emotional issues within us, the activation of our neurology and the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system starts to kind of energetically push those blockages up to the surface. And so what a lot of people experience, is whatever beliefs that might be held in the unconscious mind that they're not necessarily aware of because they've inherited them from, our culture or from family or from religion or whatever. These things can come up to the surface and become obvious, or they get explored, and we can start to question, well, is that really true? Is that belief actually serving my greatest good, or is that in some way holding me back? And in that sense, we can start to let go of those things. When traumas or unresolved emotional tensions within the unconscious mind are surfaced in this meditative process, they can finally be addressed in a way that, hopefully we are using other techniques and tools to address them in a more mature and responsible way. But once we do this, and once we get past the trauma of the impact that this world has on so many of us, then there's more freedom, and there's more availability within our energetic circuitry to process our life experiences in such a way that's going to allow learning and growth to occur more easily. And that hearing...
Trying to sneeze. Sorry, I was holding back a sneeze. Could you stop?
Bless you.
I just held it back. I didn't want to ruin it.
Don't hold it back. Don't ever hold anything back. So when we listen in a really deep way, listen beyond just the physical, audible aspect of hearing. And the words that I'm saying are totally inadequate to really describe what I'm talking about. But the one who is doing the listening,
Which is me.
which is you, and the one who's doing the listening, and then
And the sneezing.
and the sneezing. and the interviewing, that person or that, self-identified reference frame can get experienced in a completely new way.
Fascinating. I could talk with you for probably another few hours on this topics, but in the meantime, where can listeners find you online?
So the vast majority of our brainwave entrainment programs can be found on sourcevibrations.com. There's also a YouTube channel where a lot of those sample tracks can be listened to, and there's some really cool videos that go along with them.
Awesome videos. I love them. So
yeah,
cool.
They're fun, and they're trancey, and they'll put you in a state of relaxation for sure. And then I'm also doing some side projects and kind of expanding into other genres on my SoundCloud page, Asa528, ASA528. And so there's some works in progress that I'm sharing there.
Thank you so much for joining me, Asa.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. And I love the work that you're doing. And thank you for inspiring people and helping us to all grow up and make a better world.
Thanks for listening to The Art of Humanity. Please follow us on Twitter @It's Jessica Ann. Join us next week with your host, Jessica Ann. Evolve your business with The Art of Humanity.
I think the best parts of our creative expressions can come through that when there's, somewhat of a container, but nothing that's too rigid. I'm blessed to have a manager who handles all of the business stuff.
Oh, that's great.
That I don't like to do. Yeah, I mean, there's always emails to deal with and copyright violations to deal with and royalty contracts to deal with, and it's a full-time job. So
Yeah.
I've organized my life in such a way where I get to be a crazy artist.
Yay.
And it's so fun. I love it.
That's great.